Hello, I'm Anna Hoffman, and welcome to this episode of Data Exposed Live. This is a very special episode because we are actually streaming live in person at a conference. What you can't see behind me or behind the camera is this wonderful live audience that we have here today. If you're in the audience, can you give us like a hello or something audible so our folks hear you? Woo! It's exciting. Awesome, thank you. Okay, so we have a really exciting show planned today. We are here at the SQL Server and Azure SQL Conference live in Las Vegas. It's great to be back in person, great to have some people here, but we're also happy to be sharing with you all online. Now, just a few comments for our people in the room as well as our people online. We are streaming this to YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, maybe some other places coming from the Reactor at Microsoft, and we also have a wonderful audience in the room. Or online, if you have questions, either give us a wave of your hand or go ahead and throw it in the chat if you are streaming. I think that's it. So basically, every month for this year, at the beginning of the month, we've done a live news update. So we come on and we talk about all the updates that have happened across Azure SQL. So since it's December and since we're doing this in person, we thought we'd do something a little bit special. So we're actually going to take a look at the year in review, and we're going to cover all of the great updates that have come to Azure SQL, SQL Server, and Azure Arc over the past year. All right, so let's get right into it. Now, before we talk about the specific product updates, I just wanted to give a brief reminder about what we talk about when we say Azure SQL. Azure SQL is really representative of our family of SQL Server offerings in the cloud. Now, there are three main options that we have today. The first option is going to be SQL Server running on an Azure virtual machine. So this is exactly what it sounds like. It's just SQL Server running in an Azure virtual machine. So you pick the version of SQL Server, you pick the OS of your virtual machine, but you're also responsible for things like updates and setting up some things related to availability. Now, we're doing some things to help with all of those things, and we'll talk about that with Ajay later in the episode, but that's what SQL Server and Azure Virtual Machine is. We call this IaaS. Now, if we say, hey, I don't need access to the OS, I want to manage SQL Server, and I want to take advantage of some of the latest and greatest things in the cloud, but also need those instance scope capabilities like Service Broker, machine learning services, database mail, DTC, et cetera, that's where Azure SQL Managed Instance becomes a great option. And finally, if we abstract one more layer and say, hey, I don't need those instance scope capabilities, I'm building new applications, I want to take advantage of things like serverless and hyperscale, that's where Azure SQL Database comes into the picture. And this is the service that we've been running within Azure for over 10 years. So there's a lot of exciting stuff happening in this space. So just wanted to start with this, and now what we'll do is we're going to go through all of these products, and because we're here in person, I also have some special guests that are going to talk to us about Azure Arc, security, and SQL Server 2022. So let's get right into it. Now, for this first segment, we're going to talk about the latest updates in SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines, and for that, I'm going to bring up Ajay Jagannathan. Ajay, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, Anna, thanks, and glad we could make this happen both in person and hybrid. So I'm coming straight to you from Redmond. So today I'll cover the Azure Virtual Machines topic and take a look at what's new in the product. So at Ignite, we actually announced a public preview of SQL assessments as well as a new compute series, the EBY V5 series. I will go a little more in depth about both of those. Also, we announced the general availability of Microsoft Defender for SQL. So what this means is right from within the SQL Server virtual machine blade in the portal, you can look at specific vulnerabilities, take actions, and secure your VM. We are also released new marketplace images, and this incorporates all the SQL best practices when you run SQL Server setup, various configuration settings that you like to do as when you set up SQL Server is now available as part of the deployment experience. We also made available general availability of the AD util tool. This is for configuring Active Directory authentication for SQL running on Linux. And finally, with a lot of customer feedback, we have made setting up high availability with either FCI or always on availability groups, very easy with the multi-subnet configuration. So next, I'll go briefly into each of these capabilities and share more insights. So the first one is the new compute queue. One of the biggest feedback or asks that we get from customers is, especially if they are running smaller size VMs, how can they get maximum throughput at lower cost? So at Ignite, we partnered with the Azure Compute team and released a new series, E32 BDS or EBV5 series for short. So you can see from this chart that for the same workload, it's way cheaper than a comparable SKU, which was only option available in the past. So we ran the TPCC like workload, and you can see the price per ratio is actually 30% better. So the new orders per minute is significantly better with the new series than that. So and it'll keep improving as we make investments in the space. If you have workloads that require this kind of SKU, please do sign up for preview at the link below, and we'll be happy to onboard you. The next investment is a SQL assessment. So think of this as putting the entire best practice rule set that you would like to configure and run your VM or SQL Server as a service. So now when you go to the SQL Server virtual machine blade, there you will see a SQL assessment section, and it'll take you to an experience where you can set up your log analytics workspace, and you can also schedule your service to run to continuously check your SQL Server for best practices. So this checks for everything from things like SP configure settings, trace flags, and various other performance and configuration best practices, and gives you a rich dashboard with all kinds of alerts and insights, whether it's high severity, high impact to informational, etc., where you can take immediate action to make sure you get the maximum benefit of performance and other configuration settings that you want for your environment. So this is available right now in preview. And if you are already using SQL Server in a VM, all you have to do is register the SQL Server IaaS agent extension in full mode, and you'll be able to leverage this capability. The next one I highlighted was the security experience right in the VM blade. So we bought the Microsoft Defender experience that's available in Azure Security Center to also each SQL VM. So you will now see a page in the VM blade where for that specific VM, you will get all your recommendations and alerts, and you can go through each of those alerts in the table below and take respective actions or remediate it as per the fixed recommendations. You can also baseline it so that you don't get flagged for the same alert going forward for the VM. Now, let me quickly talk about what's coming next. First is, I mentioned marketplace images. We get a lot of feedback from our customers who deploy the gallery images that are available in the Azure Marketplace that there is no option to customize their SQL Server settings. So now you will see a full-blown experience, just like you would run SQL Server setup if you were to run it out of the download or installer, right? So things like max stop settings or tempdb settings or instant file initiation, some of the common settings that customers like to configure is now available as part of the setup experience in the portal for the marketplace. We also provide more customization, such as where you want to deploy, optional settings like installing tools, etc. Plus, Marketplace image also now shipped with some basic troubleshooting tools, which will be available out of box. These are all the same tools that if you have to call Microsoft support, they would recommend running. So it's now available in the box, which you can use as well. Moving forward, in the storage space, this is one of the hard areas. In addition to high availability, so customers want guidance on how do they best configure storage setting because of multiple choices of storage available. So we are making investments in this space to help you with providing the right storage configuration when you deploy the marketplace images. For example, where do you place your databases, log files, tempdb, etc. Just like you would on premises, and give you proper recommendations and warnings if it is not as per recommendation. We also give you location to configure your database settings, where you want to place the binaries versus databases, both system and TempDB, etc. As well as for TempDB itself, as you know, we invested a lot in the best practices for on-premises, such as number of files and size, etc., to avoid allocation and contention, for example, metadata contention. So you'll be able to do the same thing for VMs now through the setup experience. The last and a very important area I wanted to speak about is high availability setup. So today, if you have experience setting up high availability in Azure VMs, it is not easy. The guide we have is runs into tens of pages. It requires you to set up Azure Load Balancer, which introduces additional complexity. Plus, the load balancer has its own 10-second latency for failover if there are issues. And what we have done is basically remove the need for that through what we call multi-subnet configuration. So as you can see in the diagram here, you can set up your VMs in the same in two different subnets, and then each VM can be basically also zone redundant configuration. There is no restriction on which SQL Server or version you can use, unlike load balancer or distributed network name. And this eliminates the need for load balancer. And more importantly, since this is natively available as part of Windows clustering and SQL automatically recognizes this configuration, all features work right out of the box, and any failure that happens from one node to another is almost instant, because we will, since it's a multi-subnet configuration, we can broadcast the IP address of all the VMs immediately, and you don't have to worry about additional latencies. So these are some of the highlights. For each of the features I called out, there are blog posts which go into more detail. So please do look at it, and let us know if you have any feedback. Thank you. Back to Anna.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ajay. I think folks in the room will be interested to learn more about this, as well as folks online. For folks in the room, if you want to learn more about SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machine, Bob Ward is doing a deep dive session tomorrow morning, so you might want to check that one out. And for our folks online, we just did a live episode with Rajesh, who's one of the leading PMs for the multi-subnet configuration. So if that's something you want to learn more about, you can check that out on our YouTube page. Thanks so much, Ajay.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Awesome. Okay, we're gonna move right along. We have a lot of people coming in to talk to us about updates. Some virtual, some in person. This next guest is going to be a virtual guest, joining us all the way from actually another country. I'm not sure where. Is Nico.
Hi all. Portugal, sending all the greetings over to the US, and I'll take you through a closer look at what have been done in Azure SQL Managed Instance in the past year.
Awesome. Thanks, Nico. And one of the things I was going to say, and for folks who might not have been following Azure SQL Managed Instance super closely, is they've done so many updates, really not just this year, but like all the time. They're always working to make this more compatible with SQL Server and give you all the things that you're asking for. So I think that's what you're going to tell us a little bit more about today, right, Nico?
I would say so. With that, here is a small list. You should not be surprised after Anna just gave you a warning. I mean, it would take me probably 20 minutes going into the little details of each one of these features, and I'll go over a couple of them. But I just want to, highlight some of the areas we keep on investing. Is the compatibility with the SQL Server, the hybrid scenarios where we want to connect you with your SQL Server running anywhere, on premises or in any cloud, security, 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 and security, and performance, performance, performance. With that, let's take a look at something which we call a hybrid flexibility. If you have been aware of what we just announced at the Ignite of the fall of 2021, the key feature for us for the managed instance was a link feature for Azure SQL Managed Instance. You might ask, what is this? What is the kind of a link this is? This is a link that allows you to connect your SQL Server running on premises, on Azure, on any other cloud to managed instance. And we unlock two first scenarios. You might ask, why would I want to connect my SQL Server to manage instance? What would be the kind of like advantages of that? The scenarios will explain it to you. So first one is when you want to enable a read-only workloads and you want to enable them really, really fast. Instead of setting up your own VM, setting up a distributed availability group, being awakened at every couple of hours during the night with the problems, you can simply establish the link between the SQL Server and managed instance. Imagine you're running a principal workload somewhere in London, and then there is a client that needs to use an ADF and I don't know, maybe to do some analytics with Synapse in Australia. You can go on Azure and simply deploy a managed instance and establish a link, which will do all the heavy lifting for you, and your clients will be able to do the reading workload. The second scenario is a seamless migration to Azure. We have already kind of like uncovered the log replace service. In other terms, for those of you who are DBAs, this is a log shipping way of connecting, but that was not as fast, and it has currently a 36 hours as a maximum window for shipping the logs to Azure SQL Managed Instance. With Azure SQL Managed Instance link, you can establish a link between your SQL Server and Azure, and we do not have any fixed limit on the duration of this operation. And once you're ready, you can use one of the two common options for doing a failover, either a managed, a prepared, or a forced one, like you would do with any availability group. So if you're interested, if you're excited, go to AKMS MI link, the link you can see on your screens. Sign up for the limited public preview we are already running.
And Nico, I was just going to add, for folks here at the conference, you're going to get to see a demo of this. Potentially, this might be a spoiler alert, in one of the keynote sessions today. So you might want to stick around for that. I think it's in the afternoon with Bob Ward. Go ahead, Nico, sorry.
No, that's a pretty exclusive thing, I would say. So just, on the tech part, I already had a question, people asking like, oh, do we need to run an additional service? No, that's a brand new version of a distributed availability group, and check it out, and I'll give you a pro tip. Check out the SQL Server 2022. It has a lot of very, very special things about it. Let's take a look at the larger instances.
Sure.
So we announced first in June the preview, and then in November of 2021, the general availability of 16 terabyte support for general purpose SQL managed instances. That's a pretty big one. But then also in November, we announced a 16 terabytes preview of the business critical instances. And it's kind of right now, as of this moment, it's a limited number of regions, but check out every single week as we update the documentation. Some of my colleagues may be updating them right now as I do speak to you. Then we introduced a new hardware generation. What we call before Generation 5, we rename it into Standard Series. It's a Broadwell, Skylake, and Cascade Lake CPUs from Intel. But we introduced the Premium Series and Premium Series memory optimized. You will get an Ice Lake. This is the latest and the greatest CPUs from Intel. Clock speed 2.8 gigahertz, AVX 512 for all of you geeks. And we've seen some amazing performance. And my team allowed me to say, by default, we see on Azure Compute level 15% better performance. But we've seen some pretty incredible numbers. A closing loop on the memory and the hardware offerings. A lot of our customers paid a lot of money in order to reach the high memory offerings, because we just offered on Standard Series 5.1 gigabytes of RAM. The new series, the premium series, gives you 7, and premium series memory optimized gives you a whooping 13.6 gigabytes of RAM per vCore. So if you have a memory hungry workloads, and most of you probably do, you should consider the new offerings because it will allow you to lower your SQL Server licensing. And I'll end with the modern security. We enabled one amazing scenario. Yes, you can use a Windows authentication to connect to your managed instance. That's already in limited public preview. We enabled Azure AD only mode. Please consider this one is really cool if you want to get rid of all those SQL logins and sharing the credentials per email. You can use the Azure AD for linked server connections, either with managed identity or doing a double hop with Windows authentication. And then you can use the user-assigned managed identities to run your managed instance. That will allow you to do a custom access to your storage. And in such scenarios as ETL with open role set or backup, restore, audit, etc. Don't forget, it will allow you also to connect to Azure Key Vault and do some pretty custom scenarios. The last one I'm mentioning is the service endpoint policies, which allow you to control the storage accounts you can access from managed instance.
Nico,
And
we're getting close on time because we want to make sure we get through everything. Can you tell us what are the highlights that you have left? I know there's so many things in MI.
no, I'm actually wrapping it up. I'm just want to say, if you think that 2021 was a great year, the best is yet to come.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks so much, Nico. Again, like this is just so many updates. I think some of you in the audience have been taking a couple notes and seeing some of those updates. Even from online, we're getting some comments like we've been waiting for MI Link. We're excited to see this. We got one comment. It's kind of funny. I'm going to put it up here for y'all. It says, some could say year in review or year in preview. We have had a lot of things come into preview, but also a lot of things come into general availability. So stay tuned for more GA announcements. And with that, I'm going to thanks Nico, and we'll move on. Awesome. All right, we're going to move right along. We're going to look at some updates across Azure SQL database. Now, interesting, actually, you see a lot more things in the GA side than the public preview side. So we have pushed a lot of things through in this past year. A couple things to call out, and we are going to have a special deep dive on security in just a few minutes. But a few things I wanted to call out that we've done that have been pretty exciting are maintenance windows. This went into public preview earlier this year, and this is allowing you to kind of specify when we are updating or applying maintenance to your Azure SQL databases or Azure SQL managed instances. This has been something you all have been asking for, to be able to say, hey, I want these updates to happen over the weekend or at night, and we're also investing more in this space. Change data capture is something that's been available for Azure SQL Managed Instance and something we've been working on for Azure SQL Database. We've also added private link for change data capture. So if that's something you want to use, it's there. Query store hints is a really big ask from customers to help them kind of override some things when it comes to certain plans. So this is something you can check out. And we've done some videos on Data Exposed if you want deep dives into how query store hints works and what it can do for you. If we look at some of the GA side of things, a lot of these are security, so I'm going to let Andreas talk about those in a moment. One thing that we did change is the differential backup frequency. Now, you used to not have control over how often this was done. By default, it was done at 12 hours, but now you have the option to choose to change this to 24 hours if you like. We also added some more support for Azure Resource Terraform. So if you were using this before with Azure SQL Database or Azure SQL Managed Instance, it was kind of a hack. It was using ARM, but now we have native support in Terraform. And also scalar UDF inlining. Anyone heard of scalar UDF inlining? This was a SQL Server 2019 capability that, usually things happen and they come to Azure SQL Database first. This was one of those few exceptions. This landed in SQL Server 2019. But sure enough, we brought this into Azure SQL Database and Azure SQL managed instance. Also, you'll see a couple new learning paths and learning modules that we've done for Azure SQL. We've been trying to help developers get started with Azure SQL Database, and maybe if you're at the conference, you've been to some of those sessions that have the learning paths behind them. One is around building serverless full stack apps, and the other is around IoT with Azure SQL Database. All right, so let's keep moving along. Now, in Azure SQL Database, we have two very special things that hopefully most of you all have heard about. One is hyperscale, and this is essentially we re-architected SQL Server to be a cloud-native solution. And this has enabled us to essentially scale limitlessly. We're saying that limit today is 100 terabytes, but there's nothing physically or with hardware that's limiting us from going even higher than this. With hyperscale, since again, this is something we created from the ground up, there are some things in Azure SQL Database that we're working on bringing to hyperscale. Things like geo-replication, TDE with BYOK or bring your own key, database copy, storage redundancy, and you can see we're working through those updates, as well as zone redundancy, which we're working on for hyperscale, as well as serverless, and you'll see us kind of move towards having zone redundancy available for all of our database services. One thing I wanted to highlight when it comes to hyperscale, maybe you've seen this in another session, is how you can scale out with named replicas. So essentially, this allows you to spin up 0 to 30 named replicas of any compute size. So it doesn't have to be the same compute size of your primary. And this is going to allow you to get huge scale out. And we're kind of saying this read scale on the fly, because I could go in and deploy an 80 vCore named replica, have it within 2 minutes over a 60 terabyte database, use it for my analytics, and then delete it when I don't need it anymore. So this is really powerful for HTAP workloads or anything that needs read scale. Oh, got to switch from here. And then finally, what I wanted to mention before we get into security is some of the things that are new across Azure SQL. Maybe you've heard about some of these things. Actually, Ajay showed earlier on the Microsoft Defender for SQL available in SQL Server and Azure Virtual Machines. This is actually available also in Azure SQL Database and Azure SQL Managed Instance. You might have heard this called different things like Azure Defender. It's the same thing, now just called Microsoft Defender for SQL, all up under the umbrella of Microsoft Defender for Cloud. So it's kind of this theme we're going for across the company. And then Azure SQL Monitor Insights came out in March in public preview, I believe. And this is the ability to monitor all your SQL resources in Azure. So your SQL VMs, your SQL databases, your SQL Managed Instance, all from one place, and get a lot of counters and insights that we've heard from you all that you want to be able to see at scale across your databases and instances. And with that, I'm going to bring up Andreas Walter, who's here in person to tell you a little bit about the security updates.
Indeed. Thanks, you,
Andreas.
Anna. Yeah, as she said, I'm actually here in person. This is why I was able to push Anna off the stage. But no worries, she will come back. No worries, no worries. So I'm a program manager in the Azure SQL security team. And let's have a look at the greatest new additions to Azure SQL that we had in the last couple of months. Let me start with a very important ask that enterprise customers have. Like, enterprise customers really want to get rid of any stored passwords basically in their application, in the connection strings. And one way to accomplish that is basically to ensure that only Active Directory authentication is being used. So, and we want to be able to enforce that, which is why we have this new ability in Azure SQL to set a Azure SQL database to AED only. In Managed Instance, we have it a while ago already. Now we have it across the board. So that ensures that enterprise customers can comply with this, with the demand for only using AED. All right, the second setting, or the second feature that we've been working on is always encrypted. As you have maybe noticed, we have always encrypted since a while now. But there are certain limitations if you encrypt data, and that limits you in what sort of queries you can run on the encrypted data, because you can't really decrypt it on the fly without compromising security. However, we found a way, and we have this secure enclave, and inside this secure enclave, which is hidden from the administrator, so even a machine administrator cannot access it. Inside this enclave, running on the same machine as the SQL Server, we are able to run all these complex queries. So you get basically encryption but also complex queries on top of the encrypted data. In addition to that, if you have large data sets already in your database and you want to encrypt it right now using this technology, formerly you would have to reload it inside the database, like get it out and then reload it by encrypting it. Now you can do an in-place encryption of the data that's residing in the Azure SQL database. So those are the key new abilities that the always encrypted with secure enclaves bring you. Complex queries and in-place encryption. Now, here's a third feature that is very important to us, and this is the Azure SQL Ledger. With Ledger, we are able to give you a functionality to where you can always prove if somebody has tampered data. It doesn't block tamper, that's not the purpose, but if somebody actually did tamper the data, be it via update commands, there is a chain of these events that happened, and graphically this happened. So you have a proof that the tampering occurred, or you can also prove, obviously, that it hasn't happened. It's absolutely reliable. So this is a technology used for auditing purposes to prove whether or not somebody has tampered the data. Right? So, for example, in the case that you need to enforce a guarantee on parts of a product that nothing has been changed in the midst, etc. So this is Ledger for Azure SQL Database. That comes with two flavors, basically. It's very simple. You can use the existing T-SQL for creating tables, except we now have these additional properties that you enable a table to be table, meaning it will, by design, have this history, which is founded by the ledger, so you can determine if in the history anything has been changed, and you have a choice of either editable or append-only ledger tables. That makes it quite simple. If it only be appended, no updates can occur at all. So these are two flavors of ledger-enabled tables. All right, now let's come to something that is coming. As somebody said, here is also a preview session here. You may have heard of Azure Purview. Purview is a service that has been GA'd. It's our new unified Azure Data Governance service. Today, you would use it for creating a data map of what data you have in your Azure SQL database. But there is more to it. And the idea is that we can create policies in Purview. And with these policies, you can govern access to the databases, to the SQL servers hosting the databases. So what does that look like? Imagine you have your AAD accounts in your Azure Active Directory, and you have your SQL Server databases and managed instances or SQL Server IaaS spread across your subscription, and you want a certain administrator to access them for performance troubleshooting, maybe constantly or just ad hoc. So you have a way via Purview to create a policy that is then assigned to a higher level inside your subscription hierarchy. Could be a whole resource group where you would say, I want to have a certain group, AAD group, to have access to all SQL databases within a certain resource group right now with performance monitoring abilities, meaning the appropriate permissions that you need to run DMVs, extended events on the given SQL Server database, right? What you need for performance modeling. So this is one of the first use cases that we are enabling performance monitoring queries across SQL database, and also later on the new SQL Server that's coming up. And I believe Bob Ward will mention that as well in the session. If you are interested in that, we also have opening up our private preview right now. It's very limited in terms of how many we can support, but you can try and sign up. And if it doesn't work out, we will still obviously notify you as soon as public preview is coming up. All right, thank you. And I promised Anna will be back.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Andreas. It's really interesting stuff that we're doing in the security space. And I think two main things I wanted to call out that are especially interesting to me are Azure SQL Ledger. Andreas talked about this, but essentially what we've done is we're taking the power of blockchain, bringing it into your existing Azure SQL databases and allowing you to kind of harness the power of that in more of a centralized fashion. So I think that's really powerful. And then from a company standpoint, we're investing super heavily in things like Azure Purview. So the idea is you're going to be able to do governance over all your data and then analyze that data with Synapse. So that's some of the trends that you're going to see going forward. Really, the last thing on the pure Azure side of things that I wanted to cover today is migration. So hearing a lot about migrations, maybe you came here to try to figure out if your company should migrate. We're always working on ways to make that migration transition smoother for you. So a couple things that landed in public preview this year that have been really interesting. One is Azure Migrate. Some of you might have heard of Azure Migrate. This is meant to kind of be your one-stop shop for migration. So you should be able to discover, assess, migrate, and optimize all from Azure Migrate. And recently we announced public preview of VMware support for your SQL servers. So this essentially means if your organization is running on VMware, you can use Azure Migrate to assess your entire VMware estate as well as all the SQL servers running on that, and we'll give you really prescriptive guidance on where you should go in the cloud, what the cost analysis is, and all sorts of other good stuff you might want to use. We also recently released an extension in Azure Data Studio called the Migration Extension. And this makes you, again, gives you one place, maybe you're not running in VMware today, one place to go and takes you through every single step of going through that assessment and migration process, all the way through doing this online sort of migration with the cutover. And then on the general availability side, you'll see a lot of tools. We've been really working on our tools to help you kind of go through this assessment a lot easier. So for example, SSMA is SQL Server Migration Assistant. So this is for helping move from things like DB2, Oracle, Sybase, other things like that to SQL Server or T-SQL type of experience. So we've got lots of updates coming in here, especially around migrating from Oracle. So if that's something your organization is thinking about doing, you might want to check those out. We also have several other tools like the Data Access Migration Toolkit or Data Migration Assistant. And DMA is actually an interesting one because we worked with our data science team to understand how we can analyze your workloads, and not just from a point in time, hey, we think you should go to an 8 vCore, but hey, we monitored your workloads for like a couple weeks or a month, and now we're recommending that this is what you do. So that's really interesting, kind of how we pulled our data science team in to help you have more intelligent recommendations. A small change is the Azure Migration Program, change to the Azure Migration and Modernization Program. I call this out because if you are thinking about migrating, you should definitely go and apply for the Azure Migration Program. This is going to allow you to get free support depending on how big your organization is to migrate, get the tools you need, get the information you need. It can't hurt to apply and see what happens. And then finally, data migration, this last URL there, we've built a custom set of guides that takes you through, hey, I want to go from SQL Server 2012 to Azure SQL Managed Instance. We have a custom guide for that. I want to go from Oracle to Azure SQL Database. We have a custom guide for that. And it's going to take you through step by step the things that you need to do. We really want to help you all in this space, and we're always looking for feedback. So you'll notice in all of these places there's opportunity for feedback. All right, so we've talked about migration. We've talked about Azure SQL. We're going to shift gears a little bit into the hybrid space and talk about Azure Arc. And for that, I'm going to bring up in person Buck Woody. Buck, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Anna. It's so great to see everybody here. It's great to see you in person again. How nice is that? And so this show is amazing. You're showing, it really is, because there's so many things happening in the cloud and so fast. And it's really hard to sort of keep up with what's going on. So this show does exactly that. And you've shown some amazing things today. We've seen managed instance. So we've got SQL Server on premises. If you need the operating system and everything else, we've got managed instance if you need instance level features, but you want to have cloud support and you want to have a lot more of the sort of the DevOps things taken away from you. We've got Azure SQL DB. We've got the full gamut. And you've seen some great things today. You mentioned about security that Andreas brought with us. We've seen some things in performance. There's all kinds of improvements in managed instance, but you know what the customers have been telling me?
I don't know.
Yeah, they've been saying they really would love some of that security and monitoring and managed instance, but they want it on premises. I said, can't you give me some of that Azure stuff, but I want it here. And we said, we can do that. So over the past year, we've been talking a great deal about Azure Arc enabled data services. So what this does for you is you have a Kubernetes environment, and that can be on premises or in a cloud, anybody's cloud really, as long as it says it's Kubernetes, we'll run on it. And we will bring down for you one of two things. You can use Azure Arc enabled SQL managed instance, or we even have our Azure Arc enabled Postgres and it's hyperscale. I'll talk Postgres, yeah. And if you want that managed for you. Now what this does is it's always current. So we bring down the updates, just like managed instance always does. It's elastic scale and you deploy it with a command and it's very, very quick. It's got unified management. So now you go into Azure, you can see it on your estate, just like you see anything else in Azure data. And you also get the same tools you've been using there. We have the same security aspects that you're able to use, advanced data security, the role-based access control we've talked about. And then, of course, you get cloud billings. You've got one place for those bills and things to come in. So it's really an incredible way of doing these things. We have announced that and talked more about that in the last year.
Sure. I mean, it's certainly very interesting, but this is a year in review.
Oh, that's right.
Can you tell us a little bit about what's new?
So what's new since we announced it? Let me think. Hold on. I think I wrote some things down. I did. So a couple of things we have. We mentioned a moment ago that in public preview, we have the Azure Arc enabled PostgreSQL hyperscale. What does that mean? Well, basically there's a head node and then there are nodes that go around it so that you can scale out your work in Postgres. So if you're a Postgres shop or you're moving from Oracle to Postgres, we give you that availability. That's in public preview. But in GA, what we've done is the Azure Arc enabled SQL managed instances that we talk about. So you get the same thing you get in managed instance in the cloud on-prem. We also have this direct connected mode, and what that allows you to do is connect this environment directly to Azure so that you get your logs and metrics that are automatically updated. So you're literally able to see these things in near real time as they go by. We also have new point-in-time restore and in-place upgrades, and that's kind of cool. And we have this new thing called a dry run option. So you can give it a try on point-in-time, but not commit, which is pretty cool. And then we also have updated our tools. The command line interfaces, Azure Data Studio. Raise your hand, give us a shout if you're using Azure Data Studio for this. Okay, good. Lots of folks here in the room doing that. So there's a lot of cool new things. We've got sessions on this. And didn't you do a show or two on Azure Arc?
Yes, we have had quite a few episodes on Data Exposed for Azure Arc. So if you want to learn more about that after the conference or after watching this session, definitely lots of resources there.
Folks can go back in and find that and watch that again. So I highly recommend that. Really appreciate you bringing me up. It's good to see everybody, and it's good to see everyone online.
Thank you, Buck. Always a pleasure to have Buck on stage, though it's always a little bit frightening because you never know where we're going to go. But fortunately, this is pretty tame, pretty mild, so I appreciate that, Buck. Sometimes you have to remind him that we're live or there's people in the room or that sort of thing. But moving right along, maybe you all have heard about this thing called SQL Server 2022. We announced this just a couple weeks ago. So I thought, why not have Bob Ward come up on stage and tell us a little bit more about that? So Bob, welcome to Data Exposed Live in person and virtually.
Wait a minute, I'm just looking at the setup here. So I'm here in person. Hello everyone. I don't know how to use technology. Thank you. Anna, thanks for you said you didn't know what Buck was going to do. You don't know what I'm going to do. I can't even use a microphone. So, hey, thanks for having me today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here. Very exciting, actually. So, can you tell me, I know there's a lot of stuff going on with SQL Server 2022. Can you tell me, what are the big things? What are people really going to be excited to hear about?
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. It turns out that this afternoon here at this event, we're going to have a keynote live here at this event where we're going to talk more in details about all the great new capabilities of SQL Server 2022. We just announced it, back about a month ago, and I think I have something to show for you here, maybe. Oh, yes. I call this my wheel of power. Why is it a wheel of power? Because it's a wheel of capabilities for SQL Server 2022 at the highest level. And then the biggest things people have had excited about so far when we've announced this that now SQL Server 2022 is connected to Azure in new and unique ways. In fact, I think maybe you might be part of that story today in the keynote. Who knows? Yeah, think about the fact that, and Nico talked about it a little bit, right? Link yourself to managed instance for disaster recovery. What we haven't talked about yet, though, is link yourself to Synapse for near real-time analytics. So we'll talk a little bit about that today as well. And then there's this kind of crazy thing called intelligent query processing. Maybe you've heard of that a little bit. It's all about getting faster with no code changes. We're going to not only talk about that at the keynote today, our wonderful colleague Pedro Lopes is going to be doing a demonstration on that. And I believe even right after this session, he's doing even more details and tomorrow on that discussion as well. A lot of great features. We're still doing the meat and potatoes, Anna. We got to do meat and potatoes for security, performance, and availability, and even some extensions for data virtualization and ensuring that our T-SQL language is up to date with all the features that people love. So there's a lot to come. By the way, Anna, also I can tell everybody here live that next week, DBA Fundamentals Group, may have heard of that. It's a virtual group. I will be doing a live presentation of a complete SQL Server 2022 talk. Reed Merritt, our colleague, arranged for that. So if you've missed out on what we presented at some past events for this, come to the DBA Fundamentals Group.
All about shameless plugs.
There you go. Exactly.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You know, when this launched as a private preview. Can you tell us, like, what does that mean? How do I access this thing?
I understand. There's a lot of kind of confusion a little bit about the fact that we said it was a preview, but a private preview. So we want to make sure this release is really great for our customers when we actually release it. So what we decided to do in the beginning is make it only available to you if you signed up through our EAP program, early adopter program, because we want to connect with you in a very, direct way with our engineering team to test and try out these features based on the needs of your app and your requirements. So right now, we first went with private preview. You sign up with us at EAP signup, aka.ms EAP signup to get access to it. But we didn't want to wait. I didn't want to wait till public preview to actually tell everybody what was in it, because so many people have been waiting to know, what is the next version of SQL Server? Would there even be a next version of SQL Server? That's why we went ahead and we're talking about its capabilities today.
Awesome. That's helpful for me to know, but also, like, I want to get hands-on with it. So do our viewers. I'm sure people here as well. So when can we expect, like, a public preview or a GA for this thing?
So you're putting me on the spot live on the internet in front of audience, asking me a question like that. Thanks a lot, Anna. We've been together many years talking, but you always put me in the spot somehow. So when we launched SQL Server 2019, we 2018 actually, and in the calendar year 19, I got this question a lot actually. And you know how I answered it? We will not miss the name. So I know that's tongue in cheek. That's a terrible answer, isn't it? No, really being seriously, we called it SQL Server 2022 because we know we are going to launch that product sometime next year. So you can bet they will do a public preview sometime next year and then eventually a general availability. So we can't disclose those dates yet, but we're excited to get it in the hands of the general public next year sometime.
Awesome. And then one other question that we've been hearing a lot, like, you talk a lot about this cloud-connected SQL Server.
Right.
Like, have to be cloud connected?
No, I'm glad you mentioned that, because we really focused a lot when we announced it about these Azure-enabled cloud-connected capabilities, but it doesn't mean you have to be connected to Azure. It just means we're giving you that opportunity now, and you don't have to use all of them. You just pick and choose what your needs are. If you want disaster recovery managed instance, you just choose that. If you want near real-time and Synapse, choose that. If you want Purview integration, you choose that. So no, you do not have to be connected to the cloud, but it does extend now the capability of SQL to really be kind of a hybrid database platform in new exciting ways.
Awesome. And then, maybe my last question is going to be, how can I, like, share more information? How can I learn more about this apart from listening to all the great sessions that you've been doing?
It makes sense. I understand that people are excited. They want to share what they've learned so far about it. So since we're private preview, if you're part of that program, it's really kind of more of a non-disclosure situation. So you work with us directly. But right now, if you see anything public from us that we've presented, you're free to reshare that. Because we're in private preview, though, Microsoft will be doing all the demonstrations of those features. When we go public preview, though, when it's customer available download for everyone can just show it off to whatever they would like to do. But right now, we're the ones that will be doing the demonstrations. But we have, for example, I think it's called A.MS SQL Server 2022 Decks. I've got PDF files of talks that I've done, Pedro's done, David Pless has done. You're free to share those and talk about those with the general public.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks so much, Bob. This has been really interesting. I also heard a rumor that you might be writing a book about this. So
what are you doing this? What are you doing live? Why do you do this thing to me? I can't believe this. I don't know. Maybe another one. What the heck, right? You never know.
All right. Cool. Well, thanks so much, Bob.
Thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, take care.
Awesome. everyone. So he's always great. And for those of you here, he's doing a keynote later today. It's going to be some exciting demos, some exciting announcements there. So you want to check that out. I wanted to highlight, because we've had a lot of activity online. So I don't want you all to think we're not looking at these. Let's see. So someone commented, no physical limits. What about Earth? So that's an interesting one. I think they were talking about hyperscale. We'll see. But yeah, we've essentially re-architected so we can scale across multiple storage without being limited by the hardware limitations. All right, let's see what else, if we have any other questions. Someone had mentioned they're excited about Azure SQL Ledger. If you haven't checked that out, that's a good one to go check out. We do have a Data Exposed episode on that. Also Azure Purview. And let's see. Someone mentioned something old, something new. This is going to be a teaser for something we'll talk about just in a minute. But Buck and I run a series about machine learning called Something Old, Something New. And SQL Server 2022, the ultimate SQL Server. I like that. All right, so let's keep rolling. I wanted to talk a little bit about the future of Azure SQL and SQL Server and where we see ourselves investing pretty heavily. You can see some themes here, and maybe you've already started to see these themes in the product themselves. The first one is unify SQL across cloud and on-prem. So you saw this just now with Azure Arc, with the hybrid capabilities, bringing that manageability down to wherever you are. You also saw it with SQL Server, how we're building connectivity to things like Azure Purview, Synapse Link, Azure SQL Managed Instance. So you'll see a lot more in this space, and ideally what we're aiming for is that you should be able to get managed SQL wherever you are. And so that's kind of the goal for our team. The second thing we're investing a lot heavier in these days is developers. We really want to make sure we're meeting developers where they are, using the latest frameworks, using the things that they need, giving better support for JSON and situations like IoT and Graph. So expect to see us kind of continue to blur the line between having a purely relational database and a relational database with multi-model capabilities. Now, 3 is probably one of the most exciting ones to me. And this is the idea that our North Star is to kind of combine hyperscale, so this kind of unlimited, limitless data storage, plus a lot of things that we can do in constant time where we aren't restricted by size of data operations, bringing that with the power of serverless, so this idea of auto-scaling and auto-pausing your database when you don't need it, with this idea of elastic pools, so having a lot of databases where you can kind of resource share and cost optimize. So this sweet spot or a combination of these things is something we're working towards building for everyone. Confidential computing is another big one. Andreas talked about all the security updates that we're doing. We're continuing to invest heavily in Azure Purview. You saw one example of data policies, and then the private preview that Andreas also mentioned. Expect more to come in this space. We really want you to be able to govern all your data in Azure SQL with Azure Purview. We've also been working on Azure SQL Database Ledger. That went public preview back in May, and if you've heard about SQL Server 2022, and Bob mentioned this as well, we're also bringing Ledger capabilities to SQL Server 2022. And in general, we're going to continue to kind of blur the lines between on-prem, cloud, managed, you're in control, to give you what you need for your applications. Our CVP, Peter Carlin, says we want to build the world's database, so that's what we're working on doing, whether it's around data virtualization, analytics, you name it, we're investing heavily here. So we like to stress that we're continuing to invest in SQL Server, and we're continuing to invest in Azure SQL. All right, now for folks who are familiar with this show, we always have a pick of the month. And since this is the end of the year, and we've had a long year with Data Exposed, just a side story, we started streaming live every week in January of this year, and it's been a crazy year, crazy fun. So I thought it might be fun to bring up our producer, Marisa, and she's going to talk about my pick of the month, which is shamelessly Data Exposed. Hey, Marisa.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all today. Data Exposed. So it's been a journey of a year. We've done live episodes like what you're in now. We've done weekly episodes. We've done MVP episodes. So quite a ton of things that we've done. Yes, thank you. And here's everything. So our live shows, that's 1 hour streams. We decided to come up with some series too. So the Something Old, Something New show, that's with Buck Woody. And that kind of dives into data, machine learning topics, and then how it all ties into SQL. Azure SQL Security. So this gave the most up-to-date knowledge on what's going on security, data protection, access management, monitoring, logging. We're still doing this one even next year, so tune into that one. Azure SQL Virtual Machine Reimagine. I know it's a mouthful, but we did a live show series. We also have short snackable videos, so go check out those. So our on-demand series, these are small, snackable, 5 to 8 minute videos that we've done. There's the operational analytics one, so you can explore Azure SQL capabilities with real-time operational analytics scenarios, and that's with Silvano. Migrating to SQL, where you can learn about all the migration strategies we have, releases, tips, and migrating your databases to Azure SQL. We have the Azure SQL Edge. This was designed to get you started with the technical knowledge, use cases, and there are also demos on Azure SQL Edge. And I mentioned the VM one, and then SQL Server 2022. So that's new, and we're continuing that one into next year. And that's, again, snackable size videos where you can get the latest of what's going on with SQL Server 2022. We also took on an event for the first time. It was a 24-hour event where we had, people from all over the world in 3 different time zones. And that was designed to empower and grow the Azure community interested in learning more about ADF and Azure SQL, and that's Azure Data Factory. So lots going on, and we're going to continue our Data Exposed shows next year. So please tune in here, or if you haven't already, take a picture or a screenshot of this. And then also, here are our links for upcoming shows.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Marisa.
Thank you.
It's always exciting to recap on all the series. It's kind of crazy to think about all the series that we did.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of fun.
And we survived.
Yeah, we survived.
And we're going to continue to do it. So keep tuning in, and thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, Marisa. Can you guys hear me now? All right, I'm going to back up just for a second. Sorry. So what I was saying, first, I was giving Marisa huge kudos. She's really the backbone behind our team, keeps us organized, and she's the producer of Data Exposed, and we couldn't have Data Exposed without her. Then I was saying some resources that you see here. We're going to continue doing the news updates the first Wednesday of every month. So you can stream in live, or you can watch it later if you just subscribe to our YouTube channel. A couple things you've already seen already. The final thing I was going to mention about the survey, I think those of you in the room have heard this, but those of you online, if you could take a few moments to fill out that survey, it'd be really useful. This is going straight back to the product team. We're trying to figure out how to make Azure SQL better. What do you guys like? What do you not like? What do you want to see? So this is your direct line into the product group. So please take advantage of this opportunity. And I mentioned, I mentioned that this is the news update, and you might have said, wow, you showed me so much stuff. How am I going to remember all this? I've got like 10 pictures of screenshots. Like, what do I do? So what I wanted to show you all is that earlier today, we published the Azure SQL News Update Year in Review. And what you're going to see is this contains all the updates we talked about today, as well as the associated links. So you'll see for each service, all the things we talked about and a gazillion links, so you can go dive into whatever it is that you want to learn more about, including the mini-series for Data Exposed. So please take advantage of this. Again, this is something we do every month. So all you have to do is go to, Oh, you know what? All you have to do is go to aka.ms/news update, and you'll be able to see that every month. That link will update. So with that, we are going to, I think we're at the end of our show. We'll take questions, comments, feedback. Just really appreciate all of you in person and online bearing with us as we blend this new world of hybrid. It's really exciting to be back in person, but also to keep you all online in the loop. So thank you all so much.